That's the idea. Okay, let's move on to what? Let me see. Okay, so here on this page, I'll just give you some other names for multilateral exchange rate. Okay, so multilateral exchange rate also called the U.S. trade weighted real exchange rate, or the U.S. effective real exchange rate. Okay, so these are just some other names for multilateral exchange rate. Okay. Now let's look at the U.S. multilateral real exchange rate since 1973. So from this picture, we can see still, well, it fluctuated a lot. Okay, especially in the 1980s, just like we observed before between the US and the UK. Okay, and actually there is a name for this period. Okay, so during this period, the real exchange rate, the real multilateral exchange rate between the US and other countries, okay, appreciated first sharply and then depreciated sharply during this period. And there is a name for that called dance of the dollar. It's just a name. Okay? All right, so this is the first section for this chapter. And the second section talks about openness in financial markets. Okay, so openness in financial markets means that we can purchase, we can sell and buy foreign assets. Okay, so when we want to purchase foreign assets, we basically need to what? First, transfer our currency, right, into foreign currency, and then use that foreign currency to purchase foreign assets. Okay, so it includes two transactions. Okay, in the purchase of foreign assets. Okay, so the purchase and sale of foreign assets imply buying and selling foreign currency, sometimes called foreign exchange. So in the future, I will use FX to denote foreign exchange. Okay? Okay, so openness in financial markets allows financial investors to diversify because we can purchase assets of more countries, okay? To hold both domestic and foreign assets and speculate on foreign interest rate movements. So you can imagine that if the foreign interest rate is higher, people might want to buy more foreign assets, okay? And openness in financial markets allows countries to run trade surpluses and deficits. A country that buys more than it sells must pay for the difference by borrowing from the rest of the world. And this is exactly the example of what the US. Okay, so the US is running a huge trade deficit nowadays. And that must mean what? That must mean the US is borrowing from other countries, especially China, Japan, okay, to what? Support its trade deficit. Okay? So from here you can see that when countries are open to each other, okay, it includes two transactions. One is the transaction of goods and services, right? Namely trade. And the other one is transactions of capital. Capital can flow in and out of a country, right? Okay, so let me write it down. balance includes two kinds of transactions, goods and services. And capital. Thank you for your suggestion. It's very useful. Let me change. Okay. So here, if one country buy more than sell in this type of transaction, right? That must mean what? It should borrow from other countries, right? Okay, so here the transactions of goods and services, we call that current account. So transactions in goods and services of a country will be recorded in the current account, okay? In its balance of payment account, okay? And transactions of capital of a country will be recorded in the capital account in the balance of payment of a country. Okay? Okay, so these two, current account and capital account, forms the balance of payment account of a country. Okay, so every country has balance of payment. Basically like this. Okay, so this table is the U.S. balance of payments in 2006. So you can see that in this BOP, we have two accounts, current account and capital account. Okay? Let me see. Is there anything I need to say? The balance payment account summarizes a country's transactions with the rest of the world, and it includes current account and capital account. Transactions above the line are current account transactions. Transactions below the line are capital account transactions. Okay? The current account balance and the capital account balance should be equal, but because of data gathering errors, they don't. For this reason, the account shows a statistical discrepancy. Okay, so let's look at this BOP for the United States in 2006 again. So here, above this line, we have current account. And current account records all transactions in goods and services. Okay? And below the line, we have capital account. And capital account records all transactions in capital for the United States. Okay? And the balance of the two accounts, theoretically speaking, should be the same. But in reality, usually they are not the same because of data gathering errors. And we call that what? Statistical discrepancy. Okay? Now let's look in more detail at these two accounts. In current account, the main part of the current account is the what? The trade balance. You can see that it's the biggest, right? So for the US, in 2006, the current account balance is minus 856 billion US dollars. Okay? And among them, the biggest part is the trade deficit actually. So the trade balance is minus 763 billion US dollars. And we can see that, of course, trade balance includes export and import. And trade balance or net export is what? Export minus import, which is this. So that's why we have a negative number there. Okay? So basically, trade balance is what? Is earnings of the US from, is earnings from the goods and services of the US. Okay? And the second part of current account is what? It is the earnings from investment of the United States. Namely, these three lines, right? Investment income received by the Americans, right? And investment income Americans pay to other countries, right? So these two, you can see that it's still a deficit. So the earnings from investment for the United States is minus 9 billion US dollars in that year. Okay, so that is the second part of the current account. And the last part of the current account is net transfers received. Okay, and that is the earnings from the transfers. And you know that the US is the big brother, right? So there's no way that it can, right? It can get transfers from other countries, right? Big brother gives, right? Okay, so that year, the net transfer received is minus 84 billion US dollars, which means that the US gives, right, stuff to other countries by this amount that year. Okay? Maybe African countries, right? Or some developing countries, maybe. Okay? Okay, now let's look at the capital account. Here is, we only have one thing, right? Here. That is the first one is increase in foreign holdings of US assets. So this part is what? This part measures how many assets foreigners, right, purchase from the US. For example, the Chinese government, the Japanese government, right, they purchase a lot of the US treasury bonds, right? And those transactions are recorded in this term. Okay? The second one is the opposite. Okay? And it is smaller than the above number. Okay? So in that year, we can see that the capital account balance is what? 715 billion US dollars. That means Chinese, Japanese, Taiwanese, and I don't know, maybe Thailand, I don't know. Those countries buy a lot of American assets than American government, right, buys from other countries. Okay? And the last one is statistical discrepancy. Okay, namely the data gathering errors. Okay, I think I basically finished this part. Okay? Yeah, so you can just look at this page by yourselves. Okay? Now let's move on to the choice between domestic and foreign assets. Okay, the decision whether to invest abroad or at home depends not only on interest rate differences, but also on your expectation of what will happen to the nominal exchange rate. So now the situation is what? The start is what? We are considering whether to buy, say, the UK bonds. Okay, so in this picture, first we have two choices, right? To purchase the US bonds or UK bonds. So if we decide to purchase the US bonds, so this year, if we purchase $1 of US bond, next year we will get how much? 1 plus IT dollars. Okay? But if we decide to purchase UK bonds, then we need to first what? Transfer our US dollar to UK bond. Right? So, and how much pound we will get? We will get 1 times the nominal exchange rate. Okay? And we use that ET pound to purchase the UK bonds. And next year, how much will we will get? It should be ET times 1 plus IT star pound. Okay? Where IT star denotes the UK interest rate, foreign interest rate. Okay? So here I denotes domestic interest rate. I star denotes foreign interest rate. Okay? And then we will transfer that earning back to the US dollar. Okay? So which means what? We need to divide this number by what? E t plus 1. E. This is what? Expected E next year. Expected nominal exchange rate next year. Okay? Okay, so now we know that by buying the US bond, we will get this much. By the UK bond, we will get this much. And both are in terms of the US dollars, right? Okay, so if there's no arbitrage, these two numbers should be the same, right? Otherwise, we will just buy the one which gives you higher earnings, right? So here, and if there's this kind of arbitrage chance, people will just do that, right? And eventually, these two numbers will be forced to be the same. Okay? So theoretically speaking, these two numbers should be the same if we assume that there's no arbitrage opportunity. Okay? And that is exactly this condition. Okay? So this is the earning of purchasing the US bond. And this is the earning of purchasing the UK bond. Let me see, there must be, have the same expected rate of return. Yeah. So the following arbitrage relation must hold. Yeah. And if we rearrange this equation, we will be able to get this condition called uncovered in interest parity relation or interest parity condition. Sometimes we just use this IPC for that condition, interest parity condition. Okay? Interest means what? The interest rate, right, of the two countries. Parity, the same, right? Condition. And it is called uncovered because here in this equation, we still have this little e here. And that is what? Expected nominal exchange rate in the future, for the future. Okay? But that means what? Because it is expected number, right? But it might be the case that the number is not this, right? So there is risk there. And that risk is not covered. Okay, so this is uncovered interest parity. Okay, and of course, this is based on a lot of assumptions. Okay, for example, here we assume that to purchase the UK bond, there's no transaction cost. Okay, and you know that when you want to transfer your dollar into pound, there is transaction cost as well. But we ignore those things. Okay, yeah, for simplicity. Okay, so you should know that we ignore transaction costs, and we ignore risk. Okay? Okay. And this relation is the relation between domestic interest rate, foreign interest rate, and what? The expected rate of depreciation of the domestic currency. Do we have this before? No, let's go back to see. Yeah, we have this, right? But this equation is different from that one we see later, right? So let me just write this down. Okay, this is not the expected depreciation of the dollar, right? So this equation is not the same, totally the same. Is that right? Okay, so how can we get that equation from, hey, I'm happy to see you. How can we get that from here? Let's just give you, so basically we can express this by this. Okay, you can check. You can check. If you check, you'll find that, okay, this is this. Okay? And here, by expressing this term like this, we will have this term. And this term is that, the expected rate of depreciation of the domestic currency. We want that. So that's why we replace this term by this guy. Okay? And of course, that equation is our IPC, right? Nothing changes. We just use some other way, right, to express our IPC. So that equation is still IPC. Okay. If you agree, if we observe this equation, you can see that this is 1 plus something equals 1 plus something over 1 plus something. Right? In the solo model, we used to have this, right? 1 plus A times 1 plus B is approximately equal to 1 plus A plus B. Remember? And 1 plus A over 1 plus B is approximately equal to 1 plus A minus B. Right? We just apply this. So if these numbers are not too big, if I and this number, expected rate of depreciation, so if these two numbers are not too big, say less than 20%, then we can apply that kind of approximation, okay, to get this equation. Okay? Namely, the domestic interest rate is approximately equal to foreign interest rate minus expected rate of depreciation of domestic currency. Okay? So we get this relation simply from IPC. And what is IPC? IPC is the no arbitrage condition between the domestic and foreign bounds. Okay, namely this. So this is the relation you must remember. Arbitrage implies that the domestic interest rate, namely IT, must be approximately equal to the foreign interest rate minus the expected depreciation rate of the domestic currency. Okay. And if people expect that the nominal exchange rate won't change, then this guy, this term, will become 0. Okay? And then I should be equal to I star. Okay? Now, let's look at this. So let's ask a question. Let's assume that the 1 year US bound for the interest rate for 1 year US bound is namely I, okay, IT is 2%. And I star is 3%. Then let me ask you, should we hold the UK bands or US bands? Oh, no, this is 5, I think. Yeah, 5. Sorry. So it seems that the US interest rate is lower, right? And the UK interest rate is higher, right? So for common people, for a common person, he might think that, oh, the foreign interest rate is higher, then we should buy foreign assets, foreign bound, right? But the answer is, it depends, of course. Okay, because we have this equation. Okay? So let me just write it down here. The answer is depend. Depend on what? Depend on this term. Right? So here we have 2%. Here we have 5%. Okay, so if this term is greater than 3%, okay, that means what? That means it should be the US dollar is expected to appreciate by more than 3%. Right? So if that's the case, then the left-hand side will be greater than the right-hand side. Agree? So in that case, we should purchase the US bound. Right?
Because it's gonna be at least 5%, right? Like US interest rate, at least.
The US interest rate is 2%. Here. The UK interest rate is 5%. Here. This is US. This is UK.
But with the expected 3% at least, that means like the US interest rate will be 5% at least, right? I don't know the.
Well, I didn't get it. What? You're asking this?
Yep.
What does this mean?
Expected. Like decrease.
This guy is let's assume that it is greater than 3%. And let's say it's 4%, okay? Let's say it's 4%. What does that mean? This term is 4%. What does that mean? That means the US dollar will appreciate or depreciate. Huh? Appreciate, right? By 4%. Right? Then the right hand side is just 1%. The left hand side is 2%. Right? Then we should purchase the US back, right? And the reason is what? The US dollar will appreciate by a lot. So we should buy that, right? So even though the interest rate is not that high, but it will appreciate. Okay? And if this term is smaller than 3%, it's just the opposite. I don't think I need to explain anymore. Okay, it's just the opposite. All right? Now, let's look at, so the IPC itself here implies what? Implies unless this term is big. Otherwise, these two interest rates should be similar. Okay? Unless expected depreciation rate of the US dollar is big, otherwise the interest rate in the two countries should be similar. Okay? Now let's look at the data here. So this picture shows the 3-month nominal interest rates in the United States and in the UK since 1970. So if IPC is correct, and if this term is not that big, then these two numbers should be very, very close. Okay? Let's see whether it's that case in this picture. So here, the US interest is in the blue curve, and the UK interest rate is in a purple curve, right? Are they close? Are they? Are they close?
Not that.
Not that much, right? Sometimes it's close, sometimes it's not that much, right? So when they are close, that means what? That term is small, right? When they are not close, that means this guy might be significant. Okay? All right. I think this is the page for this chapter. So we have set the stage for the study of an open economy. The choice between domestic goods and foreign goods depends primarily on the real exchange rate denoted by epsilon. The choice between domestic assets and foreign assets depends primarily on their relative rates of return, which depend on I star and that term, expected depreciation of the domestic currency. Okay, so this is what basically learned for this from this chapter. Oops. Let's move on. What's this? Okay, any questions? Let me change my notes. Let's move on to the next chapter, the goods market in an open economy. So in this chapter, we have, I think, 6 sections. The first one is the IS relation in an open economy. Namely, I'll talk about the goods market equilibrium in when we have trade. Okay. And the second one is I'll talk about how to find the equilibrium output and its relation with trade balance. And in section 3, I'll talk about when we have some change in the demand side what's going to happen to the economy, okay, in an open economy, okay? And then I think for this part, I'll talk about the exchange rate policy. Namely, the central bank can change the exchange rate to try to affect the economy, then the upper level, or to what? To fix the trade deficit problem. Okay? And number 5 is the J curve. So here I'll talk about how the trade balance moves over time. Okay, and you'll see that the trend looks a little bit like J. Okay, the character J. And lastly, I'll talk a little bit about the saving, investment, and trade balance. Okay, first, now we must be able to distinguish between the domestic demand for goods and the demand for domestic goods. Earlier in chapter 3, these two are the same because we don't have the foreign countries. Okay? But now they are different. Domestic demand for goods. Here, goods include domestic and foreign goods. Okay? Demand for domestic goods. So here it is just what? It is just so here domestic people, right? Demand domestic goods. But foreign people also demand domestic goods. You can see that, right? So they are different. Okay, you should be able to distinguish between these two. Okay, some domestic demand falls on foreign goods. Yeah, we buy imported goods, right? From Japan, from your country, Canada, right? And some of the demand for domestic goods come from foreigners. That is what? That is our export, right? Canadians, right, purchase some Taiwanese goods, right? So that is Taiwan's export. So here, in an open economy, the demand for domestic goods is given by this equation, denoted by Z. Okay, so this is demand for domestic goods. Okay, Z is defined as C plus I plus G like before. Okay, but in these three terms, we have both domestic and foreign goods, right? Consumers purchase domestic and foreign goods, right? And firms purchase domestic and foreign goods, and same for the government, right? But we care about GDP. GDP is what? Domestic goods we produce. So we should exclude foreign goods purchased by these guys from our analysis. Okay? So that's why we need to subtract import from our equation. And here we divide that by divide import by the real exchange rate, because the real exchange rate is the relative price between domestic and foreign goods. Okay? And we add back the export because that is the production we produce, but consumed by foreigners. We still need to calculate that because we care about GDP. Okay? Now, let's see. CIG constitute domestic demand for goods. Yeah, because those guys are domestic people, right? Until now, we have okay, fine. It's domestic demand. Okay, this is domestic demand for goods, right? And it includes foreign goods, right? Yeah, let me check. Okay. So let me ask you, will epsilon will epsilon affect these numbers? Yes or no, right? Here, we have the answer here, right? So no, right? Epsilon will only affect the composition of CIG, okay? So if epsilon is higher, then these people will buy more foreign goods. That's it, okay? So these three numbers will not be, so actually if this is exogenous, so let's just forget about this, right? But these two numbers are determined by consumers and firms, okay? So they, of course, will consider epsilon to decide whether to buy domestically or from abroad, okay? But the aggregate number of these two will not be affected at all because they are affected only by what? Disposable income and Y and R here for I. Okay? Next, but epsilon will affect import. Okay? So here we can see that import is a function of domestic income and real exchange rate. Okay? The logic is what? If we have more money, we buy more, right? Foreign goods, imported goods, okay? And if epsilon is higher, that means what? Foreign goods become cheaper, so we buy more foreign goods. Okay, so that's why we have a positive here as well. For export is affected by Y star, namely foreign income and epsilon. So if foreign people have higher income, they buy more of our goods, so we export more. If epsilon is higher, that means our goods become more expensive, so we export less. Okay, so that's why it's a negative, a minus sign there. Okay, let's put all things together. Okay, I hope you still remember this picture after the term. Okay, so now we have this what? This picture again, right? So we have Y here, we have demand, right? Z, right? On vertical axis. Okay, so earlier in chapter 3, we only have C plus I plus G, right? And that is our DD line. Okay? And here, because we have, we need to subtract import, and we need to add back the export, right? So let's just do that. First, we just subtract import from C plus I plus G. Okay? C plus I plus G minus import over epsilon plus export, right? Let me just finish this. Export. So we have this first as DD line. And then we need to subtract this, right? And we know that import is a function of Y, right? So when Y is bigger, this guy is bigger, right? So that's why the vertical distance between DD and AA is bigger when Y is bigger, okay? And lastly, we need to add back the export. Export is not a function of Y, so it is a fixed number, okay? So when we add back the export, we the AA line will shift up parallelly, right, to ZZ. So ZZ is our ultimate demand line, aggregating line, okay? Okay, let's take a break.